Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving headfirst into something truly massive. We're talking about one of the most gigantic structural and legal shifts in modern economic history, India's goods and services tax, or as we all know it, GST. Just think about the sheer scale of this for a second. Unifying a highly fragmented market of well over 1 billion people. That is literally unprecedented. We're going to unpack how an entire subcontinent tried to sync up its taxation system, the massive digital leaps it took to actually make it happen, and of course, the very real political and economic friction that followed. Let's get right into it.
So here's our roadmap for today. We'll be quickly looking at the one nation tax vision, how GST actually works on the ground, the digital wins, the real-world compromises, a peek inside the powerful GST Council, and finally, the explosive compensation crisis.
All right, Part 1. The One Nation Tax, a monumental shift.
The entire grand vision behind this overhaul really boils down to just 4 words: one nation, one tax. But actually making that happen, well, that required the incredibly ambitious 101st Constitutional Amendment Act, which officially rolled out on July 1, 2017. Imagine trying to get 28 incredibly distinct states and 7 union territories to all agree on a single price tax system. It's like a giant puzzle, right? It completely rewrote the rules of doing business in India. The anchor for all this is Article 246A of the Constitution, which actually gave both the center and the states the concurrent power to charge and run this brand new, destination-based tax system.
Okay, let's move on to Part 2, how GST actually works, the mechanics. Now, it's really interesting how these 3 little acronyms perfectly divide up the power. Here's how it plays out. When a transaction happens inside just one state, the tax gets split right down the middle into central GST, collected by the federal government, and state GST, collected by the state. Easy enough, right? But when goods or services actually cross state lines, that's when integrated GST, or IGST, kicks in. Honestly, it's a pretty elegant workaround to ensure both levels of government get their slice of the pie, all without double taxing you, the end consumer.
But getting to that elegant solution, yeah, that required some serious heavy bargaining. While old clunky taxes like the state value-added tax, service tax, and luxury tax got completely swallowed up by the new system, take a look at what they kept entirely out of the GST net. We're talking alcohol for human consumption, petroleum crude, motor spirit, toll taxes, and electricity duty. As it turns out, excluding a state's absolute biggest cash cows was the ultimate bargaining chip. It was a necessary, unavoidable compromise by the center just to get the states to sign on the dotted line.
Which brings us to Part 3, digital reforms and benefits, the wins.
So the absolute biggest win here was finally killing the cascading effect. You know, that dreaded tax on tax on tax at every single stage of production. By completely wiping that out, logistical efficiencies shot through the roof and production costs plummeted. To put that into perspective, just look at the numbers. This new efficiency skyrocketed India's ease of doing business ranking from 130 back in 2016 all the way up to 63 by 2020. That is a staggering leap on the global stage. It just made it fundamentally easier for anyone to set up and run a business. And a massive driver of that newfound efficiency is the practical magic of the e-way bill. Think back to the pre-GST era. Truck drivers faced constant, agonizing border checkpoint delays. They'd wait in mile-long lines for physical inspections, paying local entry taxes known as octroi at every single state line. Now, if you're moving goods worth over 50,000 rupees, you just pre-register them online, boom, you're done. You transport them without all those frustrating stops, resulting in way faster trips and massive logistics savings. It literally transformed India into a single, seamless, fast-moving market.
It's actually really fascinating to realize that the GST portal is just one piece of a much larger puzzle of digital reforms. I mean, the computerization of the tax department actually started way back in 1981, but the recent acceleration, it's been wild. In 2017, right alongside GST, Project Insight was launched specifically to monitor high-value transactions. Then, by 2019, the faceless assessment scheme came along and totally eliminated the physical interface between the tax officer and the taxpayer, heavily boosting transparency. For the everyday taxpayer, this just meant way less face-to-face bureaucracy and a far smoother, fully digitized process.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Let's look at Part 4, challenges and compromises. The complications.
Because whilst unified in name, the actual reality shows a much more complicated landscape. States still have a very real, lingering fear of revenue loss and a shrinking pool of resources. On top of that, Having all these multiple different tax rates and slabs, well, that fundamentally compromises the pure one nation, one tax promise. And listen to this wild detail. The 2017 Central GST bill actually gives the government the authority to tweak CGST rates up to a whopping 20% without even asking Parliament's permission. No way, right? Imagine trying to run a business when the tax rules can change on a dime like that. Naturally, all these frequent, sudden revisions cause major headaches for taxpayers, which really highlights the urgent need for a fully functional GST appellate tribunal.
Let's step into the room where the decisions are actually made. Part 5. Inside the GST Council, the battleground.
So, the GST Council is definitely not your standard run-of-the-mill democracy. It strictly operates on weighted votes. The federal center holds exactly 1/3, or 33.3% of the voting weight. The states combined hold the remaining 2/3. But here is the fascinating kicker. To actually pass any decision, you need a 75% supermajority. Do the math. Because the center holds precisely 33.3%, they effectively hold a silent veto over the entire nation's tax initiatives. Literally nothing can pass without the center nodding yes. It makes every single meeting a highly delicate political tightrope walk.
And that tightrope recently snapped. Part 6. The Compensation Crisis, Act of God.
To actually convince the states to surrender their local tax powers back in 2017, the center had to promise them an incredibly robust financial safety net. Under the GST Compensation to States Act, states were strictly guaranteed a 14% annual growth rate in their GST revenue for 5 whole years, running from July 2017 to June 2022. Basically, if their revenue grew slower than 14%, the center was legally bound to write a check for the difference. To pay for all this, the center slapped a special compensation cess on luxury and sin goods, things like tobacco, pan masala, and high-end vehicles. But then, well, we all know what happened. The devastating economic shockwave of the COVID-19 pandemic hit. National lockdowns completely shattered revenue streams across the board, both for the states collecting their base taxes and for the center trying to collect that compensation cess. Faced with this massive, unprecedented shortfall, the Union government officially cited the pandemic as an act of God. Now, this was a staggering legal maneuver. They basically stated that this unforeseeable disaster fundamentally limited their actual financial ability to pay the states the compensation they had been legally promised.
As you can imagine, this sparked an incredibly intense federal standoff. On one side, you had states fiercely, and understandably, demanding their legally promised full compensation just to keep their local economies afloat. On the flip side, the center, staring down its own severe revenue black hole, asked the states to bridge the gap through market borrowing instead. This bitter disagreement led to some incredibly intense, high-stakes face-offs at the GST Council meetings. It absolutely pushed the legal and political bonds of this newly unified tax system to their absolute limits.
The pandemic was, without a doubt, the ultimate stress test for India's massive tax experiment. Look, while the administrative and digital benefits of a unified market are mathematically undeniable, the friction over revenue sharing and council vetoes, that's still very, very real. As the economy continues to evolve, it leaves us with one pretty provocative question to chew on. Will GST ultimately fulfill its promise of true cooperative federalism? Or will the structural compromises always leave the center and the states locked in a perpetual tug of war? It's a fascinating reminder that every single time we look at a receipt, we're actually looking at a fragile, ongoing political experiment. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.